Okay, so welcome everybody to Tiles 2021. Yay! We made it through to the fall, and so here we're going to. I wish we were actually in the Tsugaru area. So the picture around me is Hirosaki, and it's. I didn't take this picture today. This was actually earlier this year, but it looks the same except there's no other side, no snow in the mountain. You can see snow in the mountain there, but right now it's beautiful and green.
Yeah.
And so wish you guys were here, but next year we'll have this in person next year.
Definitely.
Yeah. So today we have three presentations we're going to enjoy. We are recording the presentations today, and those presentations will be posted on the Iwate-Aomori Jolt YouTube channel once they're finished. So if you want to go back and refer to it, you can, or let other people know that couldn't come today where to find this great content. Because we're going to be recording and because we're doing everything online and streaming, during the presentations, I'd like the non-presenters to keep their cameras turned off and their microphones muted. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat window. And at the end of each presentation, we do have time built in for question and answer. It's kind of a relaxed program today. We have plenty of extra time to play with and to have some discussions. So please feel free to ask a lot of questions of our presenters. Is it okay, Vicky? Did I miss anything?
No, I don't think so. That's good. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So without further ado, we will go right into our first presentation. Chris Horne is a teacher at Aomori University of Health and Welfare. He's been there since 2012. And he's going to be giving us a presentation today about student reaction to teachers' use of L1 in the ESL/EFL classroom. So we'll turn it over to Chris. Take it away.
Okay, let me just get my screen up here. Okay. Can everyone see my screen there?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, then. Well, let's get started then. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'd first like to thank Edo and Vicky for inviting me or giving this opportunity to talk about my first research endeavor. And I hope that everyone here today finds it interesting. Last time I was here at Tiles about 2 years ago, I think, I talked about a similar topic, but this time I'll actually be talking about a small study that I conducted last year and going through some of the findings, but also some of my mistakes and flaws of my first research project. Last time I had trouble staying on time and lost track a few times, so I'm going to make sure I stay on my notes this time. And this is my first time doing an online presentation, and it already feels as awkward as doing online classes. I already feel like I'm talking to myself, but hopefully I get through it fine. Okay, so in Japan, there has and still is a big push to teach English in English. And while I don't completely disagree with this, I don't think these sort of blanket approaches are right for every classroom or learning environment. And my personal belief that in certain environments, it's a waste to not also use Japanese or the student L1, given that in most classrooms in Japan, the students all share the same L1, that being Japanese. Now, the study wasn't meant to be anything groundbreaking. I only wanted to answer one question, and that was, how do students react to written feedback provided in English and Japanese by a native English-speaking teacher? Before going any further, I'd just like to talk about the type of environment in which I teach, as it influences the purpose and goals of this study. And it's also the environment I am most interested in. And I teach at AUHW, that's Aomori University for Health and Welfare, where all students take compulsory EFL courses regardless of their major. And this is in their first and second years. And these students major in nursing, social welfare, physical therapy, and nutrition. The students are split into classes based on their department of study, not ability level, because of timetabling constraints. Their schedules are always jam-packed full. So there are big differences in the levels of students in a single classroom. And this environment where students are taking compulsory English classes, even though English doesn't appear to be directly connected to their major, is not that uncommon in Japan. And I did actually read a paper a few years ago, which I think quite accurately describes how many students in this environment perceive EFL courses. And they see English as a burden to be endured rather than a useful vocational skill for their later careers. And while this probably isn't true for all students, it sure is for a lot of them. And I think as they move through their university years, it becomes more and more apparent. But like I said, it's not all students. And there are always those who are enthusiastic about English. It's always nice to have them. However, even for these students, English classes can quickly fall down their priority list, especially as their other courses begin to pick up pace. Students might want to do better in English classes, but they might not have the time or energy left to spare. Students here, they quite often have 4 to 6 classes, 90-minute classes a day, and they have reports due in on an almost bi-weekly basis. I feel sorry for them sometimes. And I feel as though it's in this particular environment in which this study that I'm going to talk about today has a purpose. And this study, it all started from one paper I read while I was doing my master's about 3 years ago. And it's a study conducted by Nugraheni, you can see up there on the screen, at a university in Indonesia. It explored how both teachers and students felt about feedback on writing through both a questionnaire and interviews. It doesn't mention the students' majors, so I cannot say if the learning environment matches my own, but nevertheless, it's a very good read. I actually recommend it, and I do have a reference list which I can send out if anyone is interested. But I'll just go through some of the more relevant points for now. Now, in this study, many of the teachers expressed frustration towards a lack of response from students after providing feedback. Not much changed in their subsequent writing, leading them to often question the point of spending time to give them feedback. It's probably something a lot of us have experienced, I'm sure. But reading the student responses is what really prompted my own study. Many of the students reported that feedback was too general and not really providing any guidance as to how they should change or revise their writing. Interestingly, some students even said that they didn't change something unless they were 100% sure on how to change it, as it might just become another mistake. Two more common responses in Nugraheni's study was that the feedback was confusing or at times too difficult to understand, and that teachers needed to use more simple English. What was interesting here was that rather than consulting the teacher, the students were more likely to talk to their friends if they didn't understand the feedback. And these are the points that interested me the most, and they formed the basis of my own study. And I had two big questions after reading Nugraheni's study there. And those were these ones here. are students reluctant to read written feedback provided in English because it takes more effort to read? And how would students react to feedback if it was provided in Japanese instead? And this was all speculation at this point, but my original thoughts before I started was, well, if students have low motivation towards English, or if English is lower on their priority list, how willing would they be to try and read and actually comprehend feedback if it was provided in English? And even if they were motivated, would they be willing or even able to spend the extra time necessary to do so? Would simply providing feedback in Japanese eliminate this, or would it make no difference? All of this was going around in my head, and I wanted some answers, so I took action and carried out my first study. So I conducted this study with 2 first-year classes consisting of 18 students for a total of 36. And this was 1 social welfare class and 1 nursing class. They were informed at the beginning of the course that I would be conducting a study on student response to teacher feedback, but they were not informed about the comparison of L1 and L2, so Japanese and English usage by the teacher, so as not to influence their responses. Now, it's a very simple study, very straightforward. There were 2 writing tests, and feedback on in-class writing tasks leading up to and also for the first writing test was provided in English, while feedback on in-class writing tasks leading up to and for the second writing test was provided in Japanese. And I used an anonymous online questionnaire and interviews to collect data that I'll be showing here today. The questionnaire contained both quantitative and qualitative. It's hard to say in order there. And while the interviews were aimed to explore the questionnaire items in further depth, but as you can see, there's an asterisk there, and I'll come back to that soon. Now, a key point of this study was that the feedback provided in English and Japanese needed to be equally useful. Right? Otherwise, the study would fall flat on its face. To do this, I followed Black and Williams' 3 elements of effective feedback, and those are: 1, providing students with a recognition of their desired goal; 2, giving evidence about their current position in regards to that goal; and 3, some understanding on how to close the gap between these 2. And to cover all this, I used rubrics, coding on their writing sheets, writing comments on good and bad points, as well as how to improve. So the rubrics showed students the goals that they want or that they needed to achieve. It's compulsory classes after all. And that covers point 1, the recognition of the desired goal. Returning the rubrics with points highlighted, as well as providing comments on things they did well and things they didn't do well, covered point 2. And for point 3, I wrote comments on their sheets on things that they could do to improve their writing. I also tried to limit how much feedback I gave, as another point brought up in Newbury's study, the one I introduced just before, was that giving too much feedback also had adverse effects. I mean, how would you feel if your work came back covered in red and the teacher's comments being longer than your own writing? So I mainly focused on points in which the students would be able to perceive a big difference or a difference in their grade. Now, this is the rubric I used when I conducted this study. the same rubric is also used with all classes in the same course, so not just the 2 classes that I was teaching. And these rubrics are decided upon by all of the English teachers here at AUHW. And we revise these rubrics every semester, and our current rubric is very different. It's almost completely changed. But as you can see, it's quite straightforward. We have the grades across the top. B is where we expect most students to be able to perform. And we've got the different categories here with the weighting and also some explanations on what each point is, with a small space for feedback at the bottom there. We also provide this in Japanese, and we make sure to hand these out to students before tests and explain exactly what each point means so that they actually properly understand what we expect from them. Next, this is an example of the rubric which I return to students. I've highlighted the different points there. And at the bottom, just a comment on things that they've done well or haven't done well. And I only returned the rubric for the writing tests. I didn't use this for in-class activities. You know, I'd like to be able to do that, but time is a very limited resource. And this here is an example of comments that please ignore my horrid handwriting, comments that I directly wrote on students' writing sheets. I tried to focus on providing comments that would help with how they can improve their writing. I tried to keep the good and the bad on the rubric sheet there. I did this for both writing tasks, so in-class writing tasks, and writing tests for both English and Japanese feedback. For this particular student, they really had trouble expanding their ideas. They were just kind of listing different things that they were doing without giving much explanation or detail as to why. Okay. So I'd like to go through some of the results here, but although they are insightful, as hinted at from the title here, a few pinches of salt are necessary. As I mentioned before, this was my first study, and I was very optimistic about it, though I would say now that I was probably naive. And I was thinking, I'm sure students would be willing to do a simple online survey. I'm sure I'll get some willing volunteers for my interview. I mean, everyone loves Chris. What I actually got was from 36 participants, I got 14 questionnaire responses and 0 volunteers for interviews. I did have 18 responses, but when I was going through and analyzing the individual responses, I discovered that there were some identical responses, and I couldn't tell if it was one person or 2 people who had mistakenly done the questionnaire twice or not. So I decided to remove those entirely, and that left me with 14. So that left me lacking with the data, but I am actually conducting this study again this semester, which is tomorrow that it starts, with a more detailed questionnaire and some incentives for interviews, which I'll talk about at the end. But I do think this demonstrates the low priority that I talked about at the start here with the environment. You know, the sort of low priority that students place their English classes, as even though I sent out reminders using our university software, I can send out messages to all the students. I think I sent out 2 reminders during the period the questionnaire was open, but less than half of the participants responded, which was quite disappointing. But the biggest takeaway here, like I said, there were some interesting insights. So I'd like to just go through and talk about some of the findings. The biggest takeaway here was that when asked about whether feedback was useful, all respondents answered yes for both the Japanese and English feedback. So everyone who responded in the questionnaire thought that both the English and the Japanese feedback was useful for them. So it would seem as though Black and Williams' elements of effective feedback are indeed effective. And in Nugrahini's study, some students mentioned opting not to change something if they weren't sure how to change it. So perhaps providing this sort of explicit explanation on how to improve might be key to the effectiveness of Black and Williams principles here. And that led me to think that, well, perhaps if the content is sufficient, then the language used might be of little relevance for feedback. However, there's another asterisk there. How did the students who didn't respond feel about it? Because like I said, less than half responded. So it's a bit hard to draw any conclusions there. Okay, next up, when asked about seeking help from the teacher about feedback, 2 respondents consulted the teacher for L2, so that's English feedback, but did not need to for L1, so Japanese feedback. However, 2 respondents also consulted the teacher for both L1 and L2 feedback. What does this mean? Well, given the limited numbers and being unable to ask about this more in interviews, obviously we can't say anything conclusive. However, my assumption is that the students who asked their teacher, so me, about feedback might have been the more motivated students who really want to improve. This might explain the 2 respondents who came to see me about both English and Japanese feedback. That or my Japanese is bad. I can't rule that one out either, I guess. However, as noted in Nugrahini's study that I talked about just before, the students were more likely to ask their friends when they didn't understand feedback, which could also be the case here. This particular question asked whether they consulted their teacher when they didn't understand the feedback, but it did not inquire about asking friends or classmates. And that's something that I should have put on there in the beginning, as I did highlight that in Nugrahini's study as well. But this is something that I have added to my new questionnaire as well. Moving up next, continuing from the previous question about consulting the teacher about feedback, 11 respondents for English and 13 respondents for Japanese did not require assistance with understanding feedback. Now, my intention was to ask about this more in interviews. In particular, there were 3 questions that I really wanted to ask. Did they ask friends for help instead of the teacher? Did they need help, but were they too embarrassed or perhaps hesitant to ask for help? Or did they just not care? I still have too many unanswered questions here. And, I'm sure you've all experienced the situation in class where you're maybe explaining, for example, an activity that you're going to have the students do. You explain it, you finish explaining, you ask, okay, does everyone understand? Everyone nods, yep, you're okay, let's go. You start the task and then several students will turn to their friend and they'll ask, "De nani suru no?" Right? I expect this same sort of phenomenon happens with feedback as well. They might just ask a friend or just don't do anything at all, either because they might be embarrassed or maybe they just don't care. It's something that I really want to ask about more. Coming up next here, 6 respondents commented that Japanese feedback was easier to understand. Reading feedback in English and then actually comprehending that feedback takes a lot more effort than doing the same with Japanese. And it goes without saying. And I think this one comment from one of the students sums it up quite well. 当たり前だけど、日本語の方がわかりやすい. And rough translation there would be, it goes without saying, but Japanese is easier to understand. And right, it's Japanese, right? They can read and understand it without having to put in too much effort. I mean, if I were to give you a copy of my questionnaire results in English and Japanese, which would you be more likely to read? Most likely the one which is in your first language. Not to mention, this is a mixed level class as well. So providing feedback in English is also kind of hard. The extent to which students can make use of the feedback is, well, quite largely related to their level of English as well. I know which students are a higher level than others, but because we don't conduct ability tests here, it's hard to tell exactly what level and to what extent they understand or don't understand. Surprisingly though, it was also easier for me to provide feedback in Japanese. Now, writing the feedback in Japanese did take a bit more time, especially when I was handwriting it, as I didn't want to write like a Nihonshi teacher. And if you've been to high school in Japan and you've taken the Japanese history classes, you probably know what I mean. But when writing in Japanese, I didn't have to worry about using grammatical terms. Now, a lot of these students, they don't understand present tense, past tense, or conjunction until you give them an example, and then they go, because they don't learn that. Instead, they learn, genzai ke, kako ke, setsuzokushi, because that's how they learn it in high school. And so when I was providing the feedback in English, I also had to give an example to make sure it was clear what I meant. And this also inflated the length of the comments, which obviously made it more to read as well. But I didn't have to worry about this for Japanese. So that's something surprising for myself in using the Japanese feedback there. And finally here, when asked about which language they would prefer to receive feedback in the future, there was only one response for only using English, one response for only using Japanese, and 12 responses for a combination of both English and Japanese to be used when providing feedback. There were several comments for this question, but all of them can be summarized by this one comment here. And that is, working to understand English feedback can help me improve my English, but points of particular importance should be provided in Japanese for students who find English difficult. I mean, of course, it's obvious, but students also understand that reading and actually comprehending the English feedback takes effort, and it can be difficult for others, but it does have benefits. There were only 14 respondents, as I said before, but the comments, that last part of the comment there were quite a few comments about feedback should be provided in Japanese for students who find English difficult. this part really caught my eye, as they did not mention because it's sometimes difficult for me, but rather difficult for others. So did the friends of these respondents ask them for help when they didn't understand the English feedback? And did this in turn influence their response to this questionnaire? This would back up the findings from Newbury's study that students are more inclined to talk with their classmates and friends about feedback rather than their teacher. This is something that I wanted to ask more about in interviews, but, well, you know how that went. Like I said before, I'm not particularly interested in people who want to learn English. I'm more interested in helping those who don't want to learn English, as I feel like if I can help them see some sort of improvement in their own ability, they might change their view, because it is a useful tool for their later careers, whether they think so or not. Now, again, there are flaws in this study, mostly the fact that I have gained more questions than answers. However, I have added some more new questions and also more options based on the points that I have brought up today. And like I said, my new study actually starts from tomorrow. And I've also gotten better at making Google Forms, and I've split the questionnaire into several sections with explanations about what each section is asking about to provide a bit more clarity and, to also make it feel a bit shorter. Instead of one long page of explanations and questions, it's now 4 short pages. So hopefully this makes it seem shorter for the participants as well. I was also able to provide some incentive for participating in interviews. It seems I had 0 this time. I thought, well, what if I can, give them a bit of a bribe? However, how much and what can be given is decided by the university guidelines. And for my university, that means for an interview of about 15 to 30 minutes with a student, I can give a 500 yen bookshop card. If you haven't already, I suggest check with your university on what you can provide, because 500 yen at a bookstore can't really get you anything worthwhile. Not even a new manga or a novel. You'd also have to put in some of your own money as well. So I'm not sure how much of an incentive this is actually going to be for a lot of the students. I actually wanted to give them 500 yen Starbucks cards. Then they could actually, go and have a free experience with their friends. Maybe get a frappuccino with some extra toppings and enjoy the free Wi-Fi. But even though it's the same 500 yen, the value is completely different. So this is a sign that I really want to talk about with my university and see if I can actually change it. But I'd actually really like to know what you can provide at your respective universities and schools as well. But as you can tell, I'm not very optimistic about the effect this incentive will have. However, though, I'm also doing the interviews online. Now, this seems like a pretty normal thing these days, but AUHW was really slow to get onto the online train. When I originally submitted this research request, this university was very much against doing things online. Their stance was kind of, dekimasen. But this was back in May last year. So, before things started to really get serious up this way in Aomori as well. But the university is much more open to doing things online now. In fact, I did many classes online last semester too. So I hope that this might also help with participation in interviews, as the students won't need to physically come to the university during their well-earned break, because I forgot to mention that the study, it gets carried out after student grades have been registered and finalized in mid-February. So the questionnaire and interviews take place from the end of February across the start to mid-March. So they're right in the middle of their spring vacation there. So that could have also affected the low turnout for interviews that I had. And well, I hope I'm okay for time. But like I said, I am conducting a 2.0 of this study starting from tomorrow. And this time with my new and improved questionnaire and a higher chance, even if only slightly, something is better than nothing, with the incentives for interview participants. So I really hope that I can provide some more concrete results the next time I see everyone, whether it be here at Tiles or maybe even hopefully we can hold Mies next year as well. But that's all about my first study that I conducted. Like I said, it was my first, and it did have several issues, but I'm hoping that I can fix a lot of these in my coming study that starts from tomorrow. And I'll be back, as the man himself says. And I do have my the references that I've used here today. It's not too many. If you'd like these, just let me know and I can send them out and hopefully get them to you. So that's all from myself. I guess I press this button to stop sharing my screen there. And hopefully my audio didn't cut out while I was droning on there.
No, you were good the whole way through.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Presentation. If anyone has any questions, please go ahead and unmute yourselves and feel free to ask a question.
No pressure.
No pressure. Yeah.
Hi, Chris. This is Barry here.
Hey, Barry.
Hey, how are you? Job very well done.
Thank you.
I love the study itself. Asking the one question in particular, and not mixing up different research questions all in one study, I think was a great job. A lot of presentations that I do here have 3, 4, 5, sometimes research questions within a 30-minute block, and the speaker speaks so fast that you just can't understand anything. So it was really, really well done as far as that. I do have a question or two.
Oh, yes.
And maybe a comment as well.
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah. At the beginning, you said that you had told the students that you were going to do the study, and by telling them, you got their compliance. But perhaps getting a formal compliance sheet might be the better way to go, just as far as participant understanding and agreement goes,
Yeah, so when I submitted this to my ethics committee, one thing that they really stressed was that I needed to make sure I limited any pressure for participation or influence on their grades. And I didn't get their kyoka, I'm forgetting the English now, right?
Yeah, me
I
too.
didn't get them to, actually agree to participate at that point.
Okay.
There was just an explanation. There was actually a check mark in the questionnaire itself in which they agreed to participating in the study there.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I kind of understood, as you just kind of explained it and assumed that everybody would join.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how. I understand the reason for it, but other people might have a problem with that. And if you make the study larger, or if you ask, for example, if you apply for a research grant to do this kind of study, they might have a problem with that way of doing things. So you might need to get a more formal kind of, request.
An informed consent form.
Yeah, informed consent. Thank you very much. We both couldn't think of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're like, what's the English for that? I know. Thanks, Ed. Yeah.
No worries.
So informed consent. Yeah,
Yes,
you need,
that's the word that I was looking
maybe
for
need to
before.
get a more formal informed consent from them. And that was just kind of the question. I wanted to see what you had done for that.
Yeah,
That's
for
fine. Yeah.
the next one that I'm doing, I'm actually giving the explanation at the end, not at the start, because it's not necessary to do it at the start, considering how I was getting the informed consent there. But one of the difficulties was that I can't actually carry out the questionnaire or doing the informed consent itself until after grades have been finalized, because that's the only way that I could guarantee it wouldn't have an effect on their grades. Because the ethics committees,
Right.
One thing they were worried about was that even though it's anonymous, that they have or haven't done it.
That's right.
So it has to be done after all that. And because that's during their break, a lot of them disappear.
Okay.
It can be
Right. Sure. Right. Yeah. Definitely understandable.
But that is something that, yes, I do want to keep in mind.
Okay. I have another one, if that's okay. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know how we are on time.
Well, we're good. We still have another 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. What was your kind of way of thinking, splitting the English and Japanese feedback in two different writing samples compared to mixing within one group of, with the one assignment, mixing Japanese and English, and then the next assignment also mixing Japanese and English randomly within that one assignment? I'm wondering if, the assignments, were they the same writing assignment, or were they different writing assignments? I know you're just kind of trying to get their feedback, their reactions to either English or Japanese, but I wonder if that would be one way to go. I don't know. Would that skew results or change results, or would it not change results? I don't know. It's just something to think about. I mean, I was just wondering, have you found any literature, on that, per se, mixing feedback within one writing task versus splitting only L1 feedback versus L2 feedback in two different writing tasks?
Well, from what I've looked around and found, there isn't a lot of literature on this particular way of giving the feedback in the students L1 as well. But actually, now that you mentioned it, though, there might not be. It could be maybe if I could get a third class as well, perhaps I could have one where I'm splitting English and Japanese, and another class where I'm kind of mixing them. As in the responses at the end there were 12 respondents who thought that a combination should be used there. So
yeah,
I guess that is something that I
it's just a thought. I don't know if all right.
May I ask a question?
Oh yes, I'm popular today.
Yeah, sorry to cut in.
No
That's
worries.
Are you taking a look at all at, like, are they incorporating the feedback into the subsequent writings that they're doing? Are you I know you're not interested in that as a primary study point, but Did you observe any differences between using the L1 and the L2?
Yeah, I originally thought that, I did want to try and see, if I could actually see the feedback being responded to in their subsequent writing, or, how it affected their grades. But two reasons why I opted to not go for it. One was because it was my first study and I just wanted to keep it, as easy for me to handle as possible. But two, I actually designed the basis for this study during my master's. And one thing that I was worried about, because it is this sort of compulsory English classes, where students aren't taking English by choice, it's not related to their major.
Right.
The students who, show the most, change in their writing based on feedback are probably the ones who are the more motivated. And so regardless of the language that I give the feedback in, those are probably the students who are going to show the most change, the most improvement. So
right on.
I didn't know, if it'd be, an accurate measure. So
right. Okay.
But that is something that I do want to look into as well.
Yeah, I think you could probably set up a study where, I don't know, you could figure out maybe giving the same kind of feedback at the same levels. If you have two students at intermediate levels, and then switching up like L1, L2 feedback. And of course it would be more than one student per group, but yeah, I'd be interested to see that. Of course, that's maybe a little bit longer down the road, but yeah, that's something maybe you want to put on the next year or something like that.
Yeah, that's definitely a sign that I do want to look into.
Yeah.
Can I follow up on this briefly?
Yes, please.
I think that there's some really good suggestions coming out here. One of my first questions that I thought of as I was listening to your speech, that I was listening to your talk that Barry touched on is, you talk about how students have different priorities, but you also need to remember that through the semester, those priorities change.
Yes.
And motivation changes through the semester. And so if you measure student responses to A in week 3, and then measure students' responses to B in week 10, you're not measuring the same responses to the same student at the same time, right? So I think if you have 2 classes, maybe you give Japanese feedback to class A for assignment 1, English in the other class for assignment 1, and then switch down the lines. Or you could do mixed within the same class, right? But that way you're at least, you're comparing them at the same point in their studies, especially first-year students. Maybe they're still adjusting to moving to the new city. Maybe they're still adjusting to the college life. So there's all these factors, and you want to control for as much as you can. So I really think that was good advice you got to pay attention to. The other thing is how, thinking again, how can you control for maybe the effectiveness of the feedback? And, it may seem counterintuitive, but I am imagining, if a student sits there and they have Japanese feedback, maybe they read, yeah, I get it, I understand. And then maybe they sit and they have to struggle and read the English. And through the process of struggling and reading the English, they're absorbing more, right? So it may seem counterintuitive that, the student preferences might not line up with the actual learning outcomes. So if you wanted to design an experiment that was focused more on the outcomes, you could do a writing profile where students submit the first draft. They get feedback on the first draft, and then they rewrite the same assignment, or they fix the assignment, and you can see the progress within one same task, as opposed to moving to a completely brand new writing assignment, new context and everything. You lose a lot. Also, I think that the type of feedback makes a big difference. Yes. It sounds like you're giving these rubrics with I don't want to say very general feedback, but maybe grammar point feedback or organizational level feedback, as opposed to writing directly on their essays and giving this word here should be X, this tense here should be Y.
Yes,
Right, and so I think the type of feedback that also changes how the students react to it. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know it's very, very complex, and
No.
we're
Thank you very
talking over
much.
time, but yeah. I'm also interested in feedback. I do a lot of peer review in my classes, and using rubrics and using direct feedback, and so I'm interested in developing this myself. So that's why I'm I apologize for talking so much, but I'm
No, thank you. It's part of the reason why I wanted to present here today, because, like I said, I'm still a newbie at all of this. So I'm hoping to get, a lot of feedback so I can actually use it in the future as well. Thank you.
yeah. Thank you very much.
Sounds like you may have a collaboration partner in Joshua in the future there, Chris.
Yes, I was just thinking there as well.
And in the chat, we had a comment from Masako. She wrote, "Thank you for your presentation. If you want to improve your students' English, you should only use L2. There are stages, first 20 words, then 30 words. How about that? Why don't you make an example of how to write feedback and do it in such a way you can replace some words or increase the number of parts the students write?" So yeah, that is an option to think about.
Yeah, I see that, Chris, there. One of the things that I really struggle with here is that, even if I explain something in English or, do something in English, there are students who just don't listen. And then after I've finished speaking, they turn to their friend and they get the translation to come in, and then they go into it. And I kind of want to, I think, as I said, hopefully kind of let them see an improvement in their own ability, and maybe that might change their view on learning English overall. And maybe then they might actually pay more attention to English.
Sure.
But yes, I do know that, if I want to see the most improvement, using only L2 is definitely the way to go.
Well, there is some question about that too. I mean, there's a lot of factors that come in. And Barry also wrote in the chat to look at the field of translanguaging.
Yes, I was actually writing that down.
Yeah. And, looking at how language learners code switch between their native language and their foreign languages that they're learning. And he makes a comment that there is no evidence after 50 years that L1 only is more effective. And yeah, that is, the research is kind of bearing that out. There has to be a degree of L2 proficiency in order to actually take feedback and take guidance only in the L2. So yeah, until your students get to that level, then in my own, and probably all of our experiences being living here in Japan, I'm sure we've all been in situations where we didn't understand anything that was being said around us. So, when I went to meet my wife's parents for the first time, so I was stationed over in Misawa on the east side of Aomori Prefecture, and over here on the west in Hirosaki, where she was from, they speak Tsugaru-ben, and Tsugaru-ben is not Japanese. I'm sorry, it's not Japanese.
No, it's not.
No, and so I had studied some Japanese, and then I come over here and introduce myself, and all of a sudden they're going back and forth in Tsugaru-ben, and I'm completely lost. So, yeah, we've all been there.
I still can't understand my wife's grandfather.
Oh yeah, I've been here in Hirosaki for 11 years now, and I'm getting pretty good at it. But if I talk to an older person, yeah, there's nothing. I smile and nod a lot.
But yes, regarding the sort of the mix, the combination, even in this study here, even though I didn't have a lot of respondents, the majority of them, did favor a mix of both L1 and L2 to be used. But I'm hoping to get, do sort of relatively the same study this time around, get more data, and then from there, kind of take it to the next step. So thank you everyone for your feedback and comments. I will put it to good use.
Can I just make one last little small teeny thing?
Yes, you may.
In the organization of the presentation, towards the second half with your results,
Yes.
it seems that you mixed results and discussion in the same kind of results section. So if you could keep the results to the actual results of the study and then everything else save for the discussion part of the study.
Okay.
Yeah, it just, you were mixing both of those at the same time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Greg also put a comment in the chat box, chat window there about using Google Forms. So please check that out.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Let me just do a quick copy paste of that.
Sure.
Yep, okay.
And yeah, when I did my doctoral research, I was doing a qualitative study and was interviewing students, and in a classroom of 30, I was hoping to get half 15, and I got 9. So, and I was offering 1,000 yen, the Tosho card. So.
Oh yes, actually that's so your university, was that also the Tosho card was all,
Yeah.
or you could give?
Well,
is
no,
that like a common thing at universities here?
Universities like tend to prefer Tosho cards. It's just kind of a cultural thing, I think. But they didn't limit me. There was no written limitation that they had. It just I just chose the 1,000 yen because I had to pay it out of my pocket. So I didn't want to go too much. And like you, I was like, well, 1,000 yen that can buy them, at least help pay for part of a textbook.
Yeah, well, 1,000 yen. Yeah, that's it's a substantial amount.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a bit.
But it's tough.
Not too optimistic on how much of an incentive a 500 yen bookshop Tosho card is going to be, but something's better than nothing, right?
You said your school's policy was for a 15 to 30-minute interview. It's 500. Does it go up if the interview's longer?
I think if the interview is longer, it does go up. But also it depends, who it is you're interviewing. Like for students, just in general, the incentive is really low.
So you could always build into your research plan and like a 45-minute to an hour-long interview to give you that possibility to explore the different themes. And then, hey, if you're finished in 15 minutes because you've covered all the material, then hey, so be it.
Yeah, well, that is something to take into consideration. I'm also hoping that maybe I can talk to whoever makes the rules and maybe negotiate some other things, because like I said, right, a Starbucks card, even though it's the same 500 yen, the values are completely different. Yeah,
Natsumi posted in the chat, you can employ an undergraduate student for 800 yen an hour at Iwate.
Yeah, we can do the same here as well.
Okay. So working will give you 800 yen, but sitting down for an interview, only 500.
Yeah, that's right.
That's good. Okay, well, we've reached the end of our first period there. So we have a 10-minute break built into the schedule. So we'd like to kick the next presentation off at 2:35. So we kind of run over that a little bit. So let's, everyone, please join me in giving Chris a round of applause, and thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the questions and feedback.
Sure, good job.
Yeah, thank you.